Hey, I'm Daniel,
And I'm Melissa.
and today we're going to discuss the body's role in mental health. And Mel, we've known each other for a long time. You're a valued osteopath. We've worked together for a long time. I think one of the reasons that we've started this Nurosene company here is to try and get a better sort of understanding of mental health, and particularly, at least in my opinion, sometimes the underappreciated role that the body plays in terms of our overall mental health. And I just wanted to get a little bit of an insight from you as to how do you feel the stuff that's happening at the body maybe plays in, and if you have any examples that you could use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the body plays a huge role because when our body is not doing what it used to be able to do or what we think we should be able to do, then our body's almost betraying us, right? And that plays a huge role in our mental health, just losing capacity in a sense. And then there are also external factors that might happen. So if someone has a family that they're responsible for, this is an external stress that they might not necessarily appreciate until the stress is removed. So family goes away for the weekend, all of a sudden they have all this room to heal.
Yeah, so that's interesting because then it poses this sort of like more involved dynamic of how do we look at, in that case, how do we look at stress? How do we look at injuries? How do we analyze these things from a perspective of what goes beyond our very often, what I sometimes will say is a very westernized reductionist sort of framework where we continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And while that's very good when we're looking at things like biomarkers and blood markers and hormone levels and things like that, I sometimes think it's easy to kind of swim downstream to be able to look at these things as a clinician or be people that are trying to support people in the real world. Once you get out of science, once you get out of academia, it's like, who are the folks that can kind of swim back upstream to kind of put it back together? When it comes to then the body's role in that, are there any particular things that you've found helpful, like on a general basis? I know
For
individually there's things, but from a general basis.
Just the power of movement, right? Even daily walks. And just a walk is so powerful for circulation, for oxygen delivery, for nutrients, because certainly as an osteo, I think it all comes down to blood, right? Blood flow, cerebral blood flow, even cerebral blood flow for brain health, for mental health. It's just sort of a chain reaction there. So I think movement as medicine, movement as meditation.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, we're not like sea squirts. We don't like attach ourselves to rocks and digest our brains as a source of food. So I think,
Not
yeah,
usually.
you're right. Like, not usually. Some of us do. I've done that, but I regrew it. So, yeah, I think that becomes critical to understanding. Yet I also think, sometimes the dynamic of like, what does that mean in terms of, okay, there's movement there. I think also when we kind of maybe take a little deeper look at it, when we're using things like ocular motor movements. So it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't have the ability to do a run. I don't have the ability to hop on the Peloton right now because I may have a certain level of anxiety or may be feeling a certain way, or I've got this certain traumatic brain injury. But the ability to say, you can use things like eye movements that project to multiple brain areas to be able to create activation of neurological networks. And I think you're exactly right. I think blood flow becomes critical. I think understanding that these neurons kind of adapt over time. So the way, we sometimes just casually think that, oh, it's all like just stuff goes up there and all this just magic happens. And while it can seem kind of, at least to me, it seems kind of magical, the reality of it is you can kind of get into the basics of saying like, okay, these neurons kind of know how to use oxygen. Maybe they've lost their ability to use oxygen because of stress or because of lack of sleep or because of an injury or something along those lines. But these are things that can be retrained. So when we look at things like oxygen extraction fraction, it's like, okay, we can train that mechanism that teaches those neurons to do better at pulling oxygen out of those vessels to be able to do what they need to do to be able to communicate. In terms of, I have another question for you. In terms of
Can I want to.
Please go.
I want to butt in because I feel like you touched on a couple really great things. One is the use of eye movements for things other than the eyes, right? Often people just think of the eyes as something we see with, but they are levers to the brain, or they are the brain, and so we can use them literally to favor a certain area of the brain, light up a certain area of the brain that might be associated with emotionality, right? So we can use the eyes as a lever literally for mental health.
Jamie's favorite antipsychotics.
Yes, absolutely. And just basically you're also talking about plasticity. And then the other side is sort of negative plasticity. So reinforcing patterns that might not be productive for us or beneficial for us.
Yeah, and I think even above, I think the neuroplasticity side of it, I think is sometimes even, I know you've spoken about it before, even when it comes to like pregnancy and traumatic brain injury, which could be concussion or things along those lines, is that, again, and this is where I feel like, well, you know, health and wellness, sometimes we're a bit skewed because we get so focused on behavior, and I think that's fine, but we need to understand and just appreciate the context of the underlying neurobiology. So when we look at, you know, Jamie knows another favorite of mine, Bruce McEwen, this neurobiologist that coined all this like allostasis, which is like the stability through change in our environment. But you look at things like what are called the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And you can have somebody that's been under a certain type of trauma as a child, and it literally then goes and affects the wiring of their brain. So this isn't the child doing anything. This could be the child in utero. And these things that are happening in the world around them that is actually then influencing the development of the brain. So then when we look at them 20 years down the road and we say, oh, this amygdala, which is the nexus between fear and anxiety, and this person is acting in this certain way, it's like we have to just go beyond the like, oh, let's just change the behavior. I think we have to look back and really appreciate, well, what are the things that could be contributing to that behavior? So again, approaching these situations with a little bit more of a construct that looks at the underlying biology is really important. And again, this is where I feel like it's nice to know these things, but then what do we do about it?
Absolutely.
And I think unequivocally that's some of the benefit, is that while we've seen, fortunately, unfortunately, that some of these experiences undoubtedly lay the foundations into the architecture of the brain, on the beautiful positive side of it is like we also then do have the potential to affect these things. But also the longer you wait, the harder it is to kind of do it. So understanding that there's no better time than the present to try and get into this sort of stuff, understanding where this stuff may come from and kind of moving forward from there.
I love that there's no time like the present, because often an approach in healthcare is wait and see.
That's a good
but
point.
Why?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why not take action now?
Yeah. And what are we waiting for?
What are we waiting for? Exactly.